Now, the last but not least of the alimentary tract is the large intestine. It's named large because it has a bigger diameter than that of the small intestine. It starts from the cecum, where the chyme moves from the terminal ileum into the cecum, and then it extends all the way to the outside of the body through the anus. There is some absorption that happens, so just a little bit of absorption of electrolytes and water, very minimal in its digestive abilities. It can and it does reabsorb and recycle some of the water and digestive secretions, so we don't really lose. Again, the body is kind of a conservative being, and it doesn't like losing a lot of its bile salts or digestive enzymes. The body tends to recycle them through being absorbed through the large intestine. The large intestine's main function, though, is to form and to store feces, as a step towards defecation. What are the parts of the large intestine? Anatomically, the large intestine is made out of the cecum first, then the colon, rectum, and then the anal canal. So let's take a look at the anatomy and talk about the different parts. So this right here is the cecum, which is the first part of the large intestine. And you can see here the ileum opening up into the cecum through the sphincter known as the ileocecal sphincter. Cecum means a dead end, so which is really true about the cecum. There's really nowhere to go on this end. The cecum also has lymphatic nodules, and you can find as well the appendix attached to it. And the appendix has absolutely no digestive function. It is pure lymphatic tissue. And then from the cecum, we will start going through the colon. So the chyme passes first through the ascending colon, and then the transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon. So these are the parts of the colon again: ascending, transverse, descending, and then the sigmoid colon. Just like any wall of the alimentary tract, it has smooth muscles. You can find here these smooth muscles known as the tinea coli, which pretty much act kind of like a purse string that kind of pulls on the loops of the large intestine, and it makes this pouch-shaped appearance known as hostrations or hostra. The hostrations give our stool or our feces their very characteristic shapes. And then the chyme would pass through the rectum, and this is where it will remain until the defecation reflex happens. And the feces would pass through the anal canal and then through the anus to the outside of the body. A couple of things to note for lab as well are these corners up here. So chyme would pass through the ascending colon, through the transverse, and that corner where the ascending and transverse meet is known as the right colic flexure or the hepatic flexure, because this is where the liver is. The corner on the left side is known as the left colic flexure or the splenic flexure, because again, this is where the spleen is. You can see here the structure of the rectum. You can see how there are the different folds again so that it allows for extension with the accumulation of feces. And you can see the sphincters. There is an internal anal sphincter and an external anal sphincter. The internal one is involuntarily controlled, meaning it is under the control of the autonomic nervous system. We cannot control that one. What we do control is the external anal sphincter. So the external anal sphincter is skeletal muscle fibers under somatic nervous system control. And when we train kids, when we potty train them, we are potty training them to control the external anal sphincter. So the structure of the large intestinal wall, just like any part of the alimentary canal, it has the 4 layers, that tubular organ that we've talked about. But compared to the small intestine, the large intestine does not have any villi. It does not have folds that we call the plica circularis. What it does have in addition, kind of characteristic to the large intestine are these longitudinal muscles, the tinea coli, that run kind of parallel to the different parts of the colon, and again, creates these little pouches that we called hustra. And that helps form the feces. The function of the large intestine is that really in relationship to digestion is pretty much zero, very limited to nothing. It does have lots of goblet cells to secrete mucus, and you could imagine that by this point that the chyme is pretty hard and we would need mucus so in order to move the chyme through the large intestine. It does absorb water, so it absorbs about 90% of water that enters it along with electrolytes. A very important function of the large intestine is that it has a lot of intestinal flora. It has lots of bacteria, and it helps in breaking down things that we cannot digest. For example, cellulose. Okay, it'll break that down, and it helps in the production of vitamins like vitamin K, vitamin B12, and thiamine. The last of the functions of the large intestine would be to form the feces and to carry out the process of defecation. In regards to movement of the large intestine, although just like any part of the alimentary tract, it has the two different movements, the mixing and the peristaltic, but the mixing isn't really, of great importance in the large intestine because, again, there's pretty much no digestion happening. The peristaltic movements can also happen, but they are less frequent at about 2 to 3 times per day when we get a bowel movement. Some people don't even get that much. Okay, so it could be, maybe a peristaltic bowel movement once every 2 to 3 days. So it's very variable. The peristaltic waves produce these very strong mass bowel movements, especially following a meal. And that is known as the gastrocolic reflex. And the digestive system, what it's trying to do is that now it knows that the person is eating. Well, they want to make sure, the digestive system kind of wants to empty itself on the other end. And that reflex is known as the gastrocolic reflex. It starts with the stomach, with the stretch of the stomach with either eating or drinking. And that will initiate these bowel movements, the mass movement in the colon in order to defecate. And it's a very common thing that patients come and tell you, I cannot have a bowel movement without eating something. And that is due to the gastrocolic reflex. The defecation reflex, that happens, it is initiated when the rectum is stretched with the feces. That would lead to the contraction of the rectal muscles or the smooth muscles in the rectum and the relaxation of the internal anal sphincter. Remember, the internal anal sphincter is a smooth muscle fiber that we have no control over. So because of this reflex, the internal anal sphincter relaxes. If we are not under favorable conditions, which means we are not in the bathroom, okay, we can voluntarily contract the external anal sphincter, which is that skeletal muscle fiber. When the conditions are favorable, so now we are in the bathroom, we can voluntarily relax the external anal sphincter, leading to the emptying of the large intestinal contents. Now, what are feces made out of? Well, it's basically made out of everything that we could not digest or absorb. And it also has some water, electrolytes that we couldn't absorb, mucus, remember all the mucus that was produced? There's bacteria, the bacterial flora, and there are bile pigments. And these bile pigments, again, give us the characteristic color of feces. The odor is due to the bacterial compounds produced by bacteria, and they include phenol, hydrogen sulfide, indole, skatole, and ammonia. Now, some disorders of the large intestine. So diverticulosis means the weakening of the intestinal wall, where the mucosa or the mucous membrane starts to protrude and making these little pouches. And feces or chyme can actually find its way into those pouches, and that could become inflamed and infected, leading to what is known as diverticulitis. So diverticulosis is the weakening with the pouching happening. If it gets inflamed or infected, it is now known as diverticulitis. It can be easily diagnosed with a colonoscopy. The danger of it is that these could rupture, leading to the passage of the chyme into the peritoneal cavity. Inflammatory bowel diseases, or IBDs, and you see here that they're plural because these are a group of disorders. Most common to are ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. So ulcerative colitis is a disease of the large intestine. You can see here from the name colitis, it remains in the colon, where it affects the mucosa and the submucosal layers only of the large intestine. Because of these layers being involved, it can lead to cramps and a bloody diarrhea. Crohn's disease, which is a more serious IBD, that affects all of the layers, okay, and it can happen in both the large and small intestine, and it involves diarrhea and pain as well. Colorectal cancer, which is the cancer of the large intestine or the rectum. This is the 4th most common cancer in the U.S. Good thing, though, we have screenings for them. So the screening includes what is known as fecal occult blood test. Basically taking the feces of patients and looking to find out if there is microscopic blood in there. So sometimes there might be blood, but we cannot see it by the naked eye. So we could try to find this occult blood in stools, which are, again, microscopic blood, maybe an RBC somewhere in there. Okay, there's also a colonoscopy, which is a screening process. Unless the patient has a family history of colon cancer, screening with a colonoscopy usually starts at the age of 50. And then if it is normal, the colonoscopy would be repeated every 10 years. What are the lifespan changes that happen to the digestive system? Well, first off, the tooth, we start losing that enamel, the gum can recede, and that, also helps in the loss of teeth as we age. The GI tract pretty much becomes less efficient, so it becomes less efficient in its digestive process and its absorption. Peristalsis tends to slow down, which means that food is going to remain longer in the stomach, which again means that we are going to have a high incidence of heartburn because of the passage of the gastric juice into the esophagus. The constipation becomes more frequent. Lactose intolerance increases in incidence as we age due to the loss of that lactase enzyme. The accessory organs like the gallbladder and the liver and the salivary glands, those usually, although they do age, but typically not to a level that kind of affects health. Maybe out of all of these accessory organs, I would say the salivary organs maybe are more commonly involved, and that would lead to the xerostomia that we talked about earlier. And this ends the digestive system.